what psychology calls the Fawn Response. The most dangerous trait you have isn't a vice. It's a backdoor in your personality that you were trained to leave unlocked. You call it kindness. Predators call it an entry point. The traits that got you praised in school, the helpfulness, the agreeableness, the selfless reliability, they aren't your strengths in adult competition. They are soft flanks, unprotected ports. Every person who has ever drained you didn't break past your defenses. They walked through the ones you were trained to keep open. Psychotherapist Pete Walker first identified this as the fourth trauma response: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. But there's a deeper name for this pattern: strategic naivety, not stupidity, a trained blindness to threat. A psychological vulnerability installed so early you've never questioned it, often rooted in what complex PTSD literature calls developmental trauma. And like any vulnerability, it doesn't just sit there. It lets the malware in. This video maps the entry points and shows you how to close them. Strategic naivety is when you train yourself to ignore danger just so people will like you. Your gut screams no, but your training whispers be nice. Your threat radar isn't broken. It was deliberately retuned to ignore itself. Here's how the retuning happened. Your nervous system was retuned by design through what attachment theory identifies as insecure conditioning. School needed you quiet. Your family needed you compliant. Your religion needed you selfless. They didn't want a sovereign adult. They wanted a predictable component. A child who set firm limits was called difficult. A child who named manipulation was called disrespectful. A child who refused social demands was called ungrateful. So you learned to override the signals. You learned to feel the discomfort of a bad request and push through it anyway. You trained yourself to absorb what your body was rejecting and label that discomfort as moral failure. You called it maturity. It was suppression. Stop and look at your current circle. Who is the person that makes you feel guilty for having a schedule? That's not a friend. That's a technician testing your retuned radar. The traits that emerged from this conditioning are specific. Chronic agreeableness, the default posture of yes, even when the answer should be no. Compulsive helpfulness, the reflexive movement toward other people's problems before your own. Fear of being perceived as difficult, a permanent background anxiety about how your limits will be received. These traits feel like virtues because they were rewarded as virtues. In adversarial environments, they are open ports on an unprotected system. Every skilled manipulator, particularly those with what psychologists call dark triad personalities, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, runs a probe sequence before they move. The same way Roman legions moved against enemy formations, probing for soft flanks before committing force. They didn't attack everywhere. They identified where the line would give. The probe isn't dramatic. It's a small request, a minor favor, an ask that sits just at the edge of what is reasonable. Then they watch. Do you hesitate? Do you push back? Do you explain yourself before you've even decided? Do you rush to make them comfortable when they show mild disappointment? Your response maps the tolerance. Once the map exists, the harvest begins. There are 3 ways they do it. The first 2 are common. You'll recognize them instantly. But the third one is the ghost protocol. It's the one that makes you betray yourself while thinking you're being a hero. We'll get to that in a moment. The first is guilt leverage. A limit you set is framed as cruelty. Your refusal is reframed as abandonment. Your no becomes evidence of your selfishness. The extractor doesn't ask you to change your behavior directly. They manufacture the emotional conclusion that your behavior is a moral failure. You then volunteer compliance to escape the guilt. The second is reciprocity traps. You never asked for the favor. You may not have wanted it. It arrives unsolicited, with weight. A gift, a gesture, an effort that implies debt. The debt was never negotiated, but the demand will be real. Because you were trained to honor obligation, you treat a manufactured one as if it were genuine. You pay for a debt you didn't consent to carry. Think of the coworker who brings you coffee every morning without asking. You didn't want the caffeine, but now, when they ask you to cover their shift on a Friday night, your virtue makes it impossible to say no. You just traded your weekend for a $3 latte. Now, the ghost protocol. This is why you stay in bad deals and toxic jobs long after your logic tells you to run. It's not because you're weak, it's because they've hacked your good person operating system. The third is identity attacks, the most sophisticated and the most effective. You've built your self-concept around being a good person, being fair, being someone who doesn't abandon people, being someone who isn't selfish, cold, or difficult. The social parasite doesn't need to threaten your safety. They only need to threaten that identity. When your decision to protect yourself is framed as evidence that you aren't the person you believe yourself to be, the attack overrides your judgment. You betray your own position to protect your image. The drain from all three methods is invisible at first. You feel tired, resentful, confused about why your relationships feel costly. You blame yourself before you blame the structure. Machiavelli named this pattern directly in The Prince. He wrote that a man who looks to see good in all things must come to ruin among so many who are not good. He watched how princes were weakened not by outside armies but by advisors who made themselves impossible to fire, who manufactured moral obligation until the prince's own values became the instrument of his control. The same mechanics run in your office, your closest relationships, your family. The good person identity is the most dangerous trap because it's built from real values and real convictions. The person across the table doesn't attack from outside. They stand inside your own value system and use your integrity as the instrument of the drain. The cost of being nice isn't social harmony, it's your sovereignty. Recognition alone doesn't patch the system. You need the counter-architecture. The first move is diagnostic, not aggressive. Before you change any behavior, audit the relationships and patterns currently active in your life. Where are you regularly explaining yourself before a decision is made? Where do you feel tired after interactions that should feel neutral? Where does someone's mild disappointment produce anxiety in you that is disproportionate to the situation? Map it before you move. Awareness is a start, but awareness without a new system is just watching yourself get robbed. To stop the drain, you need to adopt a posture that predators find impossible to swallow. I call it strategic civility. Surface-level functional cooperation. Polite, professional, available for legitimate exchanges. Zero emotional access for people who only show up when they need to siphon your energy. You don't owe anyone your internal state. You don't need to be cold to accomplish this. You just need to stop giving away more than the transaction requires. Think of a limit not as a wall but as a toll gate. Entry is available. The cost is mutual respect and equal effort. Pay that cost and the gate opens. Refuse it and the gate stays closed. A wall is aggressive. A toll gate is just business. If they don't have the currency of respect, they don't get through. You don't have to hate them to keep the gate closed. You just have to check their balance. The next move is tactical silence. Stop over-explaining your decisions. Every explanation is a new vulnerability. When you explain, you open an argument. When you justify a limit, you imply the limit is negotiable if the justification can be refuted. People like this hear justifications as invitations to negotiate. State your position, stop talking. Then comes guilt recalibration, what cognitive behavioral therapy calls cognitive restructuring. Guilt isn't a moral compass, it's a conditioned reflex. It fires because your nervous system was trained to fire it in response to social pressure, not in response to genuine ethical violation. Learn to separate real moral failure, harm you caused, obligation you violated, trust you broke, from manufactured guilt, which is discomfort that appears when someone else doesn't receive what they wanted from you. Real guilt requires action. Manufactured guilt requires nothing except recognition and release. Attachment theory shows us that secure attachment allows warmth without exploitation. Warmth wasn't absent in healthy systems, it was specific, reserved for those who'd shown they'd give back what they took. Toward the outside world, the default posture wasn't hostility, it was unavailability. You can't drain someone who has stopped anchoring their identity to approval. Which brings the final move, identity shift. You're currently anchored to how others perceive your goodness. Every time you override your judgment to protect that perception, you're handing the controls to someone else's opinion. Anchor instead to the quality of your decisions, to clarity, consistency, and strategic execution. Your worth isn't established by how many people find you agreeable, it's established by the outcomes you produce and the standards you hold. Closing these gaps doesn't make you cruel, it makes you unextractable. Predators aren't brave, they're opportunistic. When the siphon runs dry, when the guilt liver produces no guilt, When the identity attack finds no purchase, they move to easier targets. Not because you fought them, because there was nothing left to harvest. Here's the one truth that's harder than all the tactics. Your niceness was never yours. It was installed by people who benefited from your compliance. The schools needed quiet children. The families needed smooth dynamics. The social systems needed people who wouldn't push back. They called it virtue. It was infrastructure. For them. Subscribe if you want the counter-architecture. This channel is built for people who are done being drained.